This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to Critical Line Item. My name's Tom Ravlic. Thank you for joining me for this particular podcast. One of the greatest issues that parents and schools and society generally faces is the dangers that young people and older people face online and all sorts of issues, whether it be people wanting to groom children for the purposes of sexual abuse or terrorist organizations wanting to recruit people. Now, one of the critical issues that my guest today is dealing with is how you manage all of that from a very small organization and linking up with a whole network of regulators and community groups. I'm joined by our E-Safety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, who's going to take us through some aspects of their new strategy, which is, in a fairly easily accessible document. Anybody can read it. And she'll take us through some of the issues and then perhaps talk a bit more about emerging threats. Julie, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for taking an interest in the e-safety strategy, which is actually a refresh. Of course, the E-Safety Commissioner was established in 2015. We've had 7 years of runway. And because we're the first and really still only online harms regulator of this nature, we haven't had a playbook to follow or a strategy to follow. So we've had to make it up as we've gone along, and it's certainly we've gotten much more sophisticated. So I'd like to say that over our short history, that we've gone from the most important government regulator you've never heard of, and we hope to become one of the most important government regulators you'll hear a lot more from. And we're focused on achieving better online safety outcomes for all Australians by working across government, but across the international sector, with industry, with NGOs, with academics. This is a whole of society response. It's as you know, it's a big coordination effort. Almost all of our regulatory targets are domiciled overseas. Almost all of the websites, content, and conduct we're dealing with are hosted overseas. So this extraterritorial jurisdiction adds a whole new added element, as does the strategic outlook and the changing technology and threat environment.
If we have a look at your strategic plan, it is an interesting way of walking into this, because you've got the four P's actually. And the first one being prevention. What's the underlying what's the underlying sort of logic in the sort of document regarding prevention?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's really important to note that online safety has always been a very bipartisan issue, or a multi-partisan issue, if you will. And when this legislation was drafted, we were designated not just the online safety regulator, but also the educator and the coordinator across the Commonwealth and internationally. And I think that was very smart to do by design. When I came into the role in January 2017, the structure was probably not the way that I would have designed it. And I wanted to contextualize and set up e-safety in a way that would not only be effective in terms of outputs, but it would be intuitive in terms of the way that people understand what it is we're doing. And this is how I came up with the 3 plus 4 Ps. Actually, our last strategy had 6 Ps, so I skinnied down the Ps. But prevention is fundamental. We obviously want to prevent the harms from happening in the first place. And I believe, have done a tremendous job and punched above our weight in terms of the fundamental research that we've done and the data analysis and the insights and intelligence that we've been gathering by dealing with at the coalface with people who are experiencing online harm, not to mention the platforms themselves, to develop a really robust set of resources and programs and interventions to arm citizens with the strategies and the skills they need to keep themselves safer online, to let them know what the tech trends and challenges are. We've got something called the E-Safety Guide, that people look at all the time. It's, what are the newest social media sites, apps, games that kids are using. If I've just looked over my kid's shoulder and I only saw an orange icon, how can I search by looking for an orange icon to figure out what it is he's actually looking at? How do I talk to my kids about having these awkward conversations about what they're doing and seeing online? And how do I do that in an age appropriate way? So we lay all of that out. We literally have information on our website, esafety.gov.au, from cradle to grave. I mean, we start with early years education for parents, because 94% of Australian 4-year-olds are given access to a digital device, and parents are the front line of defense, all the way up into our Be Connected program, which has got 150 different modules of digital literacy learning and training for senior citizens, who are actually the least represented population online. So prevention is critical.
How much of your work involves, so for example, dealing with the ACCC, who handles a lot of the scam type work through Scam Watch, because there's a lot. It doesn't matter whether people are young or old; they're still very vulnerable to being conned into buying into a scam, or simply clicking on something that takes them to a place they should never be.
Absolutely. Well, we have very close working relationship with the ACCC, with the ACSC, who works in cybersecurity, with the OAIC, working on privacy, and also the ACMA, which is the communications regulator, and they're dealing with things like online gambling and disinformation and misinformation. So we're tightly aligned there, and we've actually just formed a new regulators network, which we reference in the strategy of the ACCC, ACMA, OAIC, and E-Safety, because we're all digital regulators, but we all have specific domain expertise. We all sit in different portfolios, and we want to make sure that end-to-end regulation is consistent. Now, where scams are concerned, this is what's challenging about this space. Some of it's cybercrime, some of it's online safety, some of it's online privacy. I think you could generally categorize all of that as online harm. But social engineering, which you'd be very familiar with, is a key method that is used to psychologically manipulate people into doing things, whether it's pressing a phishing link or falling prey to a scam. In our line of work, obviously, we see a lot of grooming by sexual predators of children online. Sexual extortion has gone absolutely through the roof. And that usually is happening on places like Snap or Instagram, where somebody using a fake or imposter account befriends someone, grooms them, encourages them to do a sexy Skype or a frisky, Facebook message, and then they extort them for money. It's a very, very distressing thing. So social engineering is happening across this broad spectrum. And so one of the things that we do, for instance, with Scam Watch is when we're made aware of new scams, or the way that fake and imposter accounts are being used, or what scammers do are prey upon people's worst fears, but also their best instincts. So we often see scams happening when a tragedy has happened, whether it's a fake GoFundMe account for funeral expenses, or it's in the wake of disaster relief, to what we're definitely seeing with sexual extortion, where there have been scam mails where people will say, we know your password and we've got your intimate images, and we're going to share these with all your family and friends unless you pay us in Bitcoin. So sadly, it's rife all over the internet.
Now we're moving from sort of protection, which we've touched on. Sorry, we haven't touched on protection yet.
We haven't done protecting yet.
No, we haven't done protecting yet. We've only done prevention. Now, what are the key things in the protection space that you'd care to highlight?
Right. Well, protection is really all about our regulatory schemes and the powers that we have under the Online Safety Act. So we've had an online content scheme in place for more than 20 years that deals with illegal hosting of illegal content. And as a result, we have very little child sexual abuse material or pro-terrorist content that is hosted on our shores. When we started in 2015, we set up the world's first and still only youth cyberbullying scheme, where we were set up as a safety net, not to be content moderators of the internet, but when a child is seriously intimidated, harassed, humiliated, or threatened, and they report to the social media site, that does not come down. They can report to us and we advocate on behalf of that child. And we have about a 90% success rate in terms of getting that content taken down. We have to have an image-based abuse scheme for intimate images and videos that are shared online without consent. We also have about a 90% success rate in terms of getting that content down. We have powers under abhorrent violent material, and under the new Online Safety Act, there's a new serious adult cyber abuse bill. So those are the individual complaint schemes. Under the Online Safety Act, we've been given two new powerful, what we call interlocking systemic and process reforms. One around mandatory industry codes, which we're negotiating with 8 different subsectors of industry now, and something called the Basic Online Safety Expectations, which will enable us to compel a lot more transparency from the platforms about what they are, how they're living up to basic safety expectations, with the goal of bringing out more transparency and accountability, but also lifting safety standards across the technology ecosystem.
Now, on the issue of protection, one of the things I've noticed, because of some of the work I do in the journalism that I deal with, Telegram in particular does notify people how many child abuse related channels they've deleted each day. They notify people how many ISIS-related or Islamist-related channels they've deleted each day. It's clear to me that these platforms are able to do this when they get their head around how to manipulate their technology to be able to bump these guys off. Does it concern you that there are other areas that they still don't appear to be moving quickly on?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there's a range of harms. Some of it is illegal, and of course, they should be directly responding to illegal content. It's harder to get some of it, particularly the more fringe platforms, to move on what we call seriously harmful content, or you could call it lawful but awful content. But of course, our first priority will be, there should really be a zero tolerance policy around child sexual abuse material and pro-terrorist content, or any content instructing in crime. And frankly, we see quite a bit of variability across the technology ecosystem in terms of the extent to which readily available technologies are being deployed to prevent, detect, and remove this kind of content. And I suppose I would say the limitation with the protection side of things and our regulatory schemes is regulation is applied after there has been a report and investigation, and sometimes after the harm has been done. So as you all know, we're never going to totally arrest or regulate our way out of these issues, but it is an important way of remediating harm and acting as a deterrent to future activities. And this is what leads us into that proactive and systemic change side of things, where we really need to be thinking about how do we shift the responsibility back onto the platforms themselves to be assessing risk and minimizing the threat surface and building technology protections in so that their platforms aren't being weaponized. in the way that they are. We call this safety by design, and we have initiatives that we've undertaken with industry for 4 years, as well as risk assessment tools for them, so that they can see industry best practice. They can also assess what their privacy and safety limitations are. We've also got a range of tech trends and challenges briefs that you may see, that so that we can really be actively trying to stay a step ahead, at least maybe not ahead of technology, at least in step with technology as it changes, and thinking about how it might be weaponized. So we did the first one on deep fakes, but we've done them around anonymity and identity and end-to-end encryption. Most recently on the metaverse and immersive technologies and Web 3.0. And I guess the key message here is we need to keep anticipating. Like, none of this should be a surprise. We arrive in the metaverse and there's all sorts of harm that we haven't thought about and remediated. We need to learn the lessons from the Web 2.0 world and apply them towards the development, design, and deployment of these new technology paradigms, so that we can have more positives and minimize the negatives.
But this is a problem, isn't it, Julie? We're in a phase where technology has been seen to be one step ahead of the regulatory environment, when in fact, if you look at the tech, in reality, the tech itself is agnostic, and the nasties will find a way of employing it because it exists.
That's right. And you know, in my almost 30 years working in the technology sector or as a regulator, there are vastly creative ways we've seen individuals misuse technology. But we also know that companies focus on minimizing security vulnerabilities, and they've gotten much better at that over the past 30 years. Yep. And they know how to design out, privacy flaws. Unfortunately, safety has been neglected, as has personal harms. And what we're arguing is that online safety should be the third leg of that stool of digital trust, alongside security and privacy, because the online harms that we're seeing now and are likely to come into the future. I mean, think about what could happen in the metaverse with you've got headsets on. You can't see what your children are seeing, and they can't unsee it. It's going to be conduct rather than content that's going to be challenging when they're wearing haptic suits, and their space is invaded. And we've written about the probability of virtual rape. And lo and behold, we saw tester Nina Jane Patel in the UK experience just that. We can predict what's going to happen. What we need, the platforms and the companies that are deploying and developing this technology and monetizing it, is to stop moving fast and breaking things, and to move more mindfully and use their incredible capacity for innovation and advanced technology and vast financial resources to create a safer and better online world than we have today.
But that then puts forward another proposition or another challenge to the tech companies, doesn't it? And that is to come to people like yourself when they're developing the technology, in order to work lockstep, so that what they do meets a regulatory environment that they're entering, but also also gives them some notion that they won't be infringing developing regulation.
Well, absolutely. And that's why we developed the safety by design risk assessment tools with industry and for industry. If you look at the tools, we surface up all sorts of best practice from industry. This isn't about naming and shaming. It's about showing how really wicked technology problems can be addressed through innovation and a little bit of investment. I believe that if you can target people with advertising with deadly precision, you should be able to pick up hateful commentary, known child sexual abuse material, and the digital fingerprints of known pro-terrorist content material. There's certainly a way. There needs to be a will. So again, we've got a little bit of carrot and a little bit of stick. I much rather use the collaborative approach. And I think when we work collaboratively with industry, we achieve better ends. It's also why Safety by Design doesn't prescribe what technologies or protections they should use. We believe that they will know best. They know their platforms best, but they just need to act.
Now, we've covered a fair bit of ground in the time that we've been talking. Now, where can people find more about this if they're interested in exploring this further?
They can go to esafety.gov.au, which is really our one-stop shop. It's where you can report online abuse, access our resources, and we'll have something up tomorrow morning on the 24th of August with our new strategy and strategic outlook on the homepage.
Thank you so much, Julie, for joining me. I've been talking to Julie Inman-Grant. She's the E-Safety Commissioner, and about their new strategy document, which is designed to try and improve people's experience dealing with the online world, as well as help companies in that space do things better. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.